Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome to the Human Resource Department's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee's first Can We Talk? Conversations That Matter event for 2024. My name is Ashley Thomas, and on behalf of our committee, thank you for joining us today. Let's talk about a few myths surrounding DEI. Some may think that DEI practices are divisive. DEI results in the hiring of unqualified candidates. Some may even say diversity is a form of reverse discrimination, or even DEI is just a fad. Last but not least, some may believe the future of DEI is dead. Recent headlines, such as the United States House of Representatives disbanding its Office of Diversity and Inclusion as part of the government spending bill, and the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts being blamed for the Daily Bridge collapse in Baltimore, may suggest that DEI efforts are on the out. This is definitely not the case. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI's true purpose, is to create more inclusive work, environments that reflect all people regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, culture, and age. In reality, DEI continues to grow because true leaders know it's working. And true leadership is about courage, courage to share beliefs, even when they are met with criticism, courage to be different and embrace differences instead of judging differences. Successful DEI programs require courageous leadership. Today, we are joined by three courageous leaders that have stayed the course and will help us dispel the myths. Let us welcome our committee member, Sean Esther, as he introduces our panelists and moderators for today's conversation.
Thank you, Ashley, and good morning, everyone. Joining our panel today, we have Joanna Brown. Joanna is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion for the Cleveland Orchestra, where she's leading an organization-wide approach and strategy for building and strengthening an inclusive culture and environment for all stakeholders. Joanna is also a founding faculty member of the Master of Diversity, Leadership, and Change Management degree and the Diversity Institute Certificate of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Cleveland State University. Our next panelist is Lydia Stump Hartman. Lydia is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager for the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, where she strives to ensure that the marginalized communities are able to thrive. Lydia returned to the Sewer District in 2021, having previously served as the Cleveland Foundation Public Service Fellow, focusing on issues of sustainability, water equity, and workforce development. And last but certainly not least, we have our final panelist, Eric Janis. Eric serves as Chief of Staff for Cuyahoga County Executive Chris Ronayne, with a particular focus on the overall management of the county's executive agencies and its 4,700 employees. Eric supervises Cuyahoga County Executive Office staff, including the Deputy Chiefs of Staff for Operations, Communications and Strategy, Integrated Development, and Sustainability. Eric also directly supervises the Department of Law, Public Safety, Medical Examiner, Clerk of Courts, and Health and Human Services. Eric has worked in local government for more than 26 years. Now, let's all give a rousing welcome to our panelists. Our moderators today will lead our conversation this morning, who is Lenora Lockett, who is the Director of Cuyahoga County's Department of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Kim Coleman, who is our HR DEI Committee Co-Chair and Manager with the Department of Human Resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. And thank you again for joining us this morning. I'll turn it over to Lenore for our first question.
Good morning, everyone. I know everyone is waiting to hear from our esteemed panel, so we'll go ahead and get started. Can each of you provide information on what has influenced your approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Anybody want to start? I guess I will. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for those of you who are joining us either in the audience or virtually. Very, very happy to be here. Thank you to our team for putting this panel on, the first of what I hope will be many. So my influence is both personal and professional. From a personal standpoint, I have siblings that are in diverse relationships, whether it be biracial or sexual orientation. So it's near and dear to my heart that my siblings and their partners are treated equitably. But beyond that, the work that I was exposed to and a part of in my prior position really enlightened me on the importance of DEI-related work. I worked for a county administrator who was African American, the first African American county administrator, I think, in the state. I've worked for 3 elected officials of color. Those cumulative experiences and seeing how DEI can be a positive impact on the organization and therefore a positive reflection back onto the community that we serve is really obvious to me and really evident. I would also mention, like probably many folks in this room, my passion for DEI work was rekindled or reinforced is probably the better way to put it with the events of 2020 and the murder of George Floyd. A recognition that we as a country and we in our various communities still have a long way to go to provide sort of an equitable community. And so to me, this work is incredibly important. And so I'm happy to be part of this discussion and continue the work going forward.
For me, a lot of the influence came from my undergraduate career. I was living in St. Louis and was in St. Louis at the time when Michael Brown was murdered in Ferguson and the Black Lives Matter movement was born. And so seeing the activism in our community on my campus really put me into a trajectory to really understand the roots of systemic racism. And for me, my approach to DEI and where my passion really lies is doing DEI work within government because of the race-conscious policies and programs that are a part of the US's history that were perpetuated and maintained by government. And so the role that I see for government in the future in dismantling that and creating communities and workforces that can thrive regardless of identity continues to be really important for me. So I would say that has been a really big influence. But I would, continue to see as I, in my career now, the importance of the workforce and that all employees are able to thrive regardless of identity and being able to see impacts in this work. I think we don't talk about those enough, right? Has continued to influence me and energize me in the work ahead.
I've been doing this work informally and formally for over 30 years. I had to think back, especially when Lydia mentioned her undergrad experience. I first went to Bowling Green, and we were very, very what would be called, quote unquote, radical at that time. And it stuck with me. And through my lived experiences, through my education, I've been on a personal journey of growth. And that is one of the reasons why DEI is important to me, because it challenges myself and me to actually think differently, to look at people differently, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to call things out that need to be called out, but also to extend grace, which is something that you don't always see in certain situations. And so my approach is one where I start with the willing. I don't spend a lot of time with people who, this is a struggle for them. I just don't, I don't have that energy. I'm not close to them, but I just have to be mindful of that. We all have our own feelings. We all have our own experiences. And so it's incumbent upon us to meet people where they are and to go from there. And that is actually the impetus for my approach to DEI.
Thank you. So our DEI committee has been in existence possibly 3 years, but we've really, the last year, have been tremendously making positive advancements in things we do in the community. We have visited community organizations. We have a newsletter we put out, and we have begun this conversation series. So my question to the panel is, what are your thoughts on the benefits of maintaining a DEI committee in organizations, and especially now, why is it important?
Say, I'll start. Two benefits that come to mind is camaraderie. You are working with people. You spend most of your day. If you work a typical full-time job, you're spending most of your days with the same people. And while we all have lives, hopefully, outside of work, you know, um, it's continuing to build those bonds that with people that you're spending a lot of time with on a regular basis. But then it also helps you to understand difference and the nuances around difference, because even if your entire department may be, let's say, racially or gender um, the same, there's still nuance of difference in between, with everyone. So I think that the committees help people to, one, understand each other, but also to provide a platform for helping to call other people in. You're exploring different concepts, and it's just helping to increase awareness around various topics that is important to the people that work at the institution.
Yeah, I would, just to build on what you're saying, the camaraderie piece is so important. And by extension, what it does is it builds a sense of mission and common purpose, and that in turn builds a sense of culture. And in my judgment, working towards those efforts has the happy byproduct of also making you a more effective organization. And so camaraderie is important. You want your employees to get along with each other, but more importantly, you want them to provide the diversity of thought and creativity that comes with a diverse workforce, and also a sense of shared mission and shared purpose, which I think is really important. I would only add that from my standpoint, as someone who's sort of at the top of the pyramid in terms of an organization, such committees are incredibly important to provide feedback, to provide an avenue for employees to allow them to say, hey, this is working, or have you thought of this, or I know you're trying here, but this really isn't having the impact you think it is. And I think that is incredibly valuable feedback that any leader should welcome. And then finally, I guess I would just say an effective committee like the one we have here, and that we are growing in terms of its strength and valuableness, also can reflect back information or perspective from the community at large that's really important for leaders in an organization to have. So to me, it's incredibly important on several different levels.
Also add what I have seen in my experience is that from a DEI committee, you can start to build this community of what I call DEI champions, and having an organization invest in their development and growth in DEI, in being able to have difficult conversations around DEI, which we know need to be had. We can start with a small group and have that be amplified across the organization. I'm one person in an organization that's large but smaller than the county, right? And I can't have those conversations with every employee. I don't have the trust and rapport with every employee. And so having that committee allows us to have an amplification effect, right? But we need to invest in their learning and growth so that they feel equipped and empowered to have those conversations.
Thank you for sharing. It's evident that there's a lot of benefits and a need for diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workplace, and it has benefits individually and in our community. However, we also know that there are obstacles. What are some of the key obstacles you've encountered, and how have you overcome them?
I think one of the key obstacles, and I think it's very relevant to our conversation today, is how do we center the experiences of marginalized identities while not alienating others, right? And so we need to keep at the root of this work the experiences and the voices of those with marginalized identity, and we need to better communicate how we all benefit from this work. And so I think that is an obstacle. And I think, as Joanna mentioned, for folks who are really not wanting to engage in these conversations, where do we meet them, right? And where do we bring them into these conversations?
Well, I'll just add to that, and Lenora, I think you can relate, given that we work on this together. There is a sense of intentionality that is important, and sometimes you have to overcome obstacles related to intentionality. It could be inertia, it could be this is the way we've always done things, it could simply be a function of time and focus. And that's a particular challenge I have as a leader in our organization. I think my staff understands how much I value and think DEI work is important to our organization, but to be committed to it on a regular and consistent basis is a challenge. So I have to be intentional about it. And sometimes I need reminders from my staff, which is a good thing. But it's easy to sort of get caught up in the, well, things aren't bad, so we're okay. But in order to make positive change, you have to be intentional. That can be a barrier sometimes.
There's a lot of obstacles. You know, and how do you pick just one? Okay, so I'm going to say a leader's mindset. And when I say leader, I mean across the entire organization. Not most people, we're of this mindset that, oh, if the top person is not invested, then nothing is going to happen. And you know, I just believe that if you need change, it's gonna occur. And there is this concept called tempered radicalism, where there are people within the organization who stay, and they really try to affect change from within. And I think that helps to move mindset from maybe a very fixed perspective to a mindset that is open to growing. And if you are in a situation where you have either peers or other people around you, community, different people who they don't see the value of what you're saying, sometimes time can help to advance the cause. I look back on something very simple, and in my lifetime, we didn't, in the beginning, when I was driving, we didn't have to wear seatbelts. You know, now you have to wear a seat. It's like automatic. I mean, like, you know, you get in, you've trained yourself to make that change for the better. The other thing is tobacco, and how I remember where they used to have smoking sections in restaurants, and we were talking the other day where somebody was like, you know, you used to could smoke on planes, which boggles the mind. But hey, I mean, whatever. But it was definitely. And now look, where are we now? That is something that over time, and I'm not talking about a century ago. This is within the last like 20, 30 years of change. And I think that for me, when I look at the obstacles, I may not be the person to address that obstacle, but I can probably get us closer to addressing it. And, you know, this is a marathon. It really is more like a relay. You know, you have different people who are moving along in this journey, and there are certain things that you can take all the way to the end. You know, you're the sprinter. You got the 30-second or 10-second time. But then there are those of us who we're in it for the long haul. We're cross country. We're going to do long-term work, but we're also going to pass the baton to people who can take that work further. And I think that helps us address some of the obstacles.
So just to add on to what you have said, how do you, or in your experience, what tips can you give us to help get those who don't believe in DEI initiatives see the needs and benefits of DEI initiatives?
Well, there's a couple of layers, I think, to that question, and so a couple of thoughts. The first thing is again, as part of this intentionality, setting up opportunities for employees to be engaged with, educated, supported, will allow employees to become sort of more understanding and hopefully more accepting of DEI principles and why they're important. I would also say that there will be some employees that will never see the need, no matter how much you try to educate them. And my response to that is, okay, that's your right, but there are a set of norms and expectations in terms of how you behave in the workforce, and that this is a culture within the organization. And if you can't adhere to that or respect it, then perhaps we're not the right place for you to work. You're not going to change everybody's minds. But most employees are willing to be to grow, to learn, as has been mentioned earlier, and you have to take advantage of that opportunity, provide them the resources and the chances to allow that growth to happen.
I would. There are two things that stand out to me. One, like I said, I am not of the mindset of getting into deep-seated arguments with people who are firm in how they believe. They
Right.
have a right to believe
Agreed.
what they want to believe, because I don't know their experiences. I don't know what has got them to where they are today. I have learned to stay curious and to lean more into that curiosity. I think that helps people to see that I'm open to hearing their side or their point of view, because it helps me to understand. And the more that I can understand, then the more that I can share ways that perhaps initiatives, concepts, projects benefit all and not just one demographic. I think a lot of times with DEI, we can really amplify about the one demographic that we're focused on, but we don't share how helping this demographic helps us all win. And I feel like it becomes this scarcity and zero sum game. Like, oh, well, if we have something that helps, say, Black people, then other people are that means that we're losing out on something. And it's just not the case. It is an expansion. And the more we can help people to see that there's an expansion of the benefits versus a scarcity of the benefits, I think we can move things a lot farther.
I've had some success with, as we expanded the dimensions of diversity that we were talking about at the sewer district, where different folks were entering into those conversations. And so we were having a conversation around generational diversity, and that brought folks that we hadn't seen in these conversations before. But it's important that we use that as a bridge and not just leave them in this. The only part of DEI that I care about is generations, right? We have to think about liberation for all, right? And it's all interconnected. And so how do we use that entry point as a bridge to helping them understand how it's interconnected, I think has been something that I've seen be successful when we're seeing folks kind of step in a little bit, and just how do we get them to understand the interconnectedness between all of the different dimensions of diversity that we're talking about.
Thank you. Each of you have mentioned respecting that there will be a population that is not for the work to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, we know that there are entities that are taking action to oppose and dismantle. What do you feel are the motives behind the intentional effort to be counter to DEI and equity and inclusion?
You look like you have a thought on your mind.
Well,
Well, as you gather yours, I'll make a couple of comments. We know we live in a hyper-political environment in this day and age, and so cynically, so often, these kinds of efforts, particularly when I'm thinking about in terms of governments beyond the local level, so state and federal, are strategic political efforts to advance a different person's or different group's agenda, and that's unfortunate that something like this has been politicized the way it has. I would also say there are a couple of myths, and frankly, I think they were mentioned in some of the opening remarks as arguments as to why DEI efforts should be dismantled that just, in my judgment, are flatly not true. The first is this idea that DEI divides or segregates or what puts wedges between different groups of people within an organization or a culture or a community. And in my judgment, that's not the case, especially if you have an effective program that allows people to become more educated and understand more about their neighbor, their coworker sitting next to them, the client that they're serving in the community. So I think it's actually more helpful, not less. And then I think the second myth that really bothers me is because I just don't think it's true, is this idea that if you are incorporating DEI type efforts, particularly in your hiring practices, that somehow you're not getting the very best. That somehow you're not doing it only based on merit, and I think that's a false paradigm. There are plenty of qualified employees for every position that you have, and sometimes it's about fit, sometimes it's about perspective. You as a leader in your organization have to look around and say, are there enough diverse voices in my meeting room? And if there's not, I got to be thoughtful about that. Even if I've got a batch of qualified employees, what will make the organization work best? So those arguments tend to be two of the most prevalent in terms of opposing DEI efforts, and I think they're both flat wrong.
I think that there is a vocal minority group that is having these strategic attacks, as Eric mentioned, to dismantle these programs. And we have to be targeted and louder. And we know that I saw a study that was just published yesterday that employers and employees still care about DEI. And I think the media and we are being told that people don't care, right? But I think it's a loud minority. And so we, in DEI, with employers, need to be louder and say that our employees still care and this is still relevant.
Lydia, this is a public sector work is a different environment, but we certainly see in the private sector, notwithstanding some of those loud vocal voices, that leaders in the private sector who have a profit motive understand the value of diversity and choose to continue to move forward on it. So sometimes it's looking past those loud voices and seeing actually what's happening sort of in our boardrooms, in our neighborhoods, in our local government chambers. So
I think I would expand upon that and ask yourself, who benefits? Who benefits from this chaos? Who benefits from the division? Who benefits from these distractions? And I want you to really start thinking about when one thing is in the news and it's blown up, what else is coming down the pike that doesn't get a lot of attention? And so I find that in this day and age, anything related to race, because it's a trauma, it's a trigger for everybody. Everybody leans in. They, we have to express our dissatisfaction. We have to express our contrarianism in regards to whatever the situation is. And I'm always just fascinated by what's in the small byline. This was passed. This got closed. This person got a shorter jail sentence than they should have. A lot of it is distractions, but it is a very intentional plan of distraction because there's so much that this small minority wants to advance that in order for them to move things forward, you have to create so much attention and energy on one side that's where all your attention and energy goes, so that when the time comes for laws to be passed, when the time comes for budgets to be um, voted on, and for us to vote for different people who are want to advance things in the overall community's best interest, you're tired and worn out. And then and when you're tired and worn out, what happens? You disengage. And so to me, it is systemic. Um, there are all kind of isms, racism, sexism, all the things, but it is systemic. And one of the things that I share, like, with people is that systems that have been in place, people and people who have experienced these systems in place for a long period of time, meaning that it's baked into their DNA, it's baked into their culture to expect this and to lean into this luxury or this privilege way of doing things. It is that system wants to continue. So it is going to do whatever it needs to do to continue at all costs. And so as you are able to see things, you can understand what is the system's motivation for wanting to stay in power, for wanting to stay alive. It is, this systematic attack on DEI. There is a reason why it's being raised up. Why? And it goes back to my initial question, who benefits?
I think that's so important. Once you ask that question, why, and you can see it a little more clearly, you can sidestep the noise or the arguments and stay focused on what you believe is important. I think it's very well said.
And it really helps us because sometimes you can you can make this personal, where this is a personal attack against me. And I'm not saying sometimes it is, but when you're in this work and you are a leader of an organization, or you're on the executive committee, you're a leader in DEI work, you have to have the skill to disengage from things that may come across as personal, to actually look at the situation from a larger lens.
I think that's why this conversation is important, so we can show how DEI works. So can you share with us some initiatives that you've had within your organizations that have shown measurable progress, that got buy-in, that made a difference?
Joanna, I think you should start with this one.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Who's been at their organization the longest?
Yeah.
So I am obviously, I kind of keep claiming my new card, but new ended a few months ago. So joining the Cleveland Orchestra in January of 2023. So new to the role, also new to the industry. I'm from Cleveland, go Glenville, and Cleveland State. And so it is, as I think about over this past year, what does success look like? Success looks like slow is fast. And it also looks like partnering with my other executive colleagues. It also looks like listening and taking the time to understand an industry and field that I had very cursory knowledge about. And so one of the things that stood out to me immediately was that there is a a limited diversity in leadership in arts organizations at large. And so when you look at our organization as a orchestra in the orchestra field, it's also, a limited number of diversity. People who have you have more gender diversity, but you don't have as much racial diversity in terms of leadership. So, what is one way that I know it's a long game, and that is to help create opportunities for students, for younger people who are either in college or about to graduate to to gain experience within our organization, who are interested in either arts administration at large or some sort of nonprofit administration, which will help the field of nonprofit administration. So we have launched this year, we received a grant from the Gunn Foundation, the George Gunn Foundation, and we launched our arts administration internship. We have 2 fantastic interns. They're in a rotation, and they're rotating through like our top 4 departments, and they are literally involved in everything. And what I love about it is that it may, we may see one of them join an organization sooner than what I think, because they're both musicians in their own right. But it also is something it has legs. I will be able to see them throughout their career. And so that is something that I think really helps, to move something that, yes, I want to see change immediately, but I also need to invest in change that can be over time.
I'll call back to the DEI committee question. I think one of the most successful things that I've witnessed over the last few years is this amplification effect that we started with maybe 10 employees on the committee. We started adding subcommittees to work on specific projects, and we invested in their growth. And now I would say we've grown from 10 to probably 75 people that I would count as DEI champions. And that's a critical mass, right? And so that is so important when we're talking about meeting people where they're at and what DEI looks like on the day-to-day, that they're the ones that are challenging their teams in the decisions that are made and how we interact together as groups. And so I think that has been very, very successful in the last couple of years in my own work.
So I'm relatively new to this organization and would be excited to come back to you in the coming years to talk to you about the successes that we will have here, building upon the work that Lenora has been doing. I'll talk a little bit about a small thing that where I previously worked that we did, a couple qualifiers, but one of which is when we think about DEI work, oftentimes we think about at its base level of compliance. And those of us who have been in this space for a long time know that's only really the very first step. There's a long way to go beyond that. But in terms of compliance, in terms of procurement, my prior employer did a small thing. At their public meetings every week, when they were passing resolutions, in this case related to procurement, there was a report from the DEI manager on the percentage and the volume of work of procured work that was diverse. So there was an expectation that you talked about it every week. How are we doing? And it's not just a percentage. It's, what about the big contracts? What's happening? It's setting an expectation that we want to show progress. And it happened because of that. It happened. Now, it also happened, obviously, because of the hard work of an expanded DEI office that my boss put together. But it's being intentional. It's demonstrating by, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about metrics, it's demonstrating by measurement progress. And so when you can find ways to do that, I think that's incredibly helpful.
If I could add one program, in November of 2023, gosh, I can't believe we're in Um, the orchestra piloted a sensory-friendly concert, and that concert was absolutely amazing. The feedback that we received from families, I was there, and so I expected to see children um, of varying abilities, varying um, ways in which they would want to engage with the music, with the place, and I saw people across all ages, and it was that the success of that program. We had our second one, I think in February. We now have it where it is now. We'll have two per year, and when you think about success, success is not we are hyper focused on race, and there's so many different dimensions of diversity that as we think about accessibility and neurodiversity, that I'm very proud of our education and community engagement committee department that have been leading this charge to help make sure that music is accessible for all.
You've each mentioned that it's not just a sprint, a marathon, that it's not just quantity or a specific dollar or a numerical metric, that it could be a quality metric, and that you have to measure success today and for the future and the near future. So what are some metrics within that realm that you feel are will demonstrate our success at advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, there are certainly qualitative metrics that you, as a leader, need to pay attention to in terms of your organization, engagement being a big piece of it. But there are also quantitative measures that you can be intentional about. I mentioned one earlier. I'll talk about another or several, and that is in the area of employment. Attraction and retention can be measured. Pay equity can be measured. Pipelines for future leadership roles can be measured. And so good, successful organizations are not afraid to do that and can build on that to provide solutions based on what you learn about where you are in the moment. So there are things you can measure. And here at the county, we're about to undertake a strategic planning process, sort of at a broad level, organization-wide. And we put in the request for information specifically an expectation that DEI-related measures and DEI-related programming will work across the organization in all of what I'll call all the buckets. So there are ways in which things can be measured. You need to be intentional about it. It takes work. But it can be done.
I'll give an example. A lot of people look at the stage in terms of who they perceive racially is playing an instrument. And so a lot of times there's a question around diversifying the stage really across race and gender. In order to do that, you have to understand, you have to have you have to understand the process. So in order to get on the stage, you have to win an audition. So it's just not, they sound fantastic, put them up there. No, they have to they have to compete and win this audition. But in order to win the audition, you actually have to apply to to participate in the audition process. And what we have started to gather is the information, the demographic information of who is applying. Because if only two or three Black or Hispanic musicians are applying, it's a much higher chance that they have to succeed in order to get to the stage. So if you have more people who are diverse applying, then you have greater chances to see more of that diversification that you want to see on the stage. So it's challenging us to look at where are we posting our open auditions, what who are we connected to? Are there some partnerships that we can start to look at, maybe with HBCUs, to see how we can cultivate relationships? Because there's also the music teachers who are very invested in the success of their students. So do we have those relationships? Do we have it? So that data is, we're now looking at a wider range of recruitment strategies so that we can diversify the stage. And then you also have to understand the qualifications of who is a musician. Most of our musicians have advanced degrees. So if you are not going to college, if you are not getting your master's, all these things can play a part in that, what you know what you see. And I will say that we had a fantastic concert last night. If you missed it, you missed it. But it's those things. It's understanding. It's not just that's the result. We have to look at everything else that helps us get there. So I love this in my technical terms, you should disaggregate the data.
Well, and to that, with data, it's really important for organizations to set a kind of a baseline understanding of how do employees perceive the culture, right? And perception and real, there are connections, right? And so being able to evaluate regularly and seeing change in that quantitative data is something that can assess impact. I also think that there are a lot of processes where bias and discrimination can creep in, and we can measure that too. So if we look at discipline data, if we look at grievance data, if we look at performance management data, we can look at all of that and see, is this representative of our workforce or not? And being willing to look at that data is really important.
Well said.
When we're talking about data and successful initiatives, sometimes those initiatives take money. So, how would you guys, you panel, suggest that we make a justification for increased funding for our DEI offices and committees?
But that's not an easy one because so often dollars follow priorities, and it's important that leaders and organizations have those shared priorities as it relates to DEI work. If that is truly the case, and folks will put their proverbial money where their mouth is, then funding can follow. Beyond that, I think it's really important as we talk about data and measuring that we demonstrate clarity of information provided, and success in the work is always helpful in terms of justifying more dollars towards an effort. But it really comes down to how important is it?
Dr. Martin Luther King used to infer that budgets are moral documents. And when you think about where you spend your money, any organization, whether that is a government, a for-profit, a nonprofit, even us personally, when you look at your budget and where your expenditures are, that tells you what your priorities are. You know, that tells you what you value, what that organization values, what that individual values. And so I think that it is important for organizations, even in this time of inflation, even in this time of, this is a tougher time financially for organizations and governments than people may really understand. And so you have to kind of say, okay, this is important. Do we keep it at the same level? Do we increase it, or do we scale it back just a little bit so that we can make all the other priorities fit? But I think that if you're saying it's not, it's important, but we don't have any money for it, that's a whole different conversation that an organization needs to have. And I can't tell organizations what to do with their money, but I would ask them to be very intentional about understanding why they're making those choices.
I also think in our government institutions, it's our job to serve the community, right? And if we are not reflective of our community's experiences and identities in our workforce, how can we do that well? And so I think that, particularly in the government space, is a really important point for advocating for more funding.
You each have mentioned a long-term plan that is the value, diversity, equity, and inclusion are values and principles. So what do you suggest or recommend on creating a solid plan that does not result in failure of diversity initiatives due to diversity fatigue?
Well, so I think it's two parts to your question. An initiative, whether it is a DEI focused initiative or not, has the potential to fail. And I think that sometimes we have to give ourselves permission to fail, because we learn. You can learn from that. You can learn what not to do. If you're only holding DEI efforts up, like, oh, you have to meet every goal, you have to meet every metric, then that's there's a level of perfectionism, and it's unrealistic expectations, because diversity, equity, and inclusion only moves forward as fast as the people that are involved with the work moves forward. So there's that this notion around failure I do not see as a bad thing. But I also think that diversity fatigue happens more because individuals, you can have institutional diversity fatigue, but pretty much I think it is more so with individuals not practicing what they preach, taking the time out to step away. This can be a part of who you are. It does not have to consume who you are. And I think that keeping that in mind will help mitigate the fatigue. And also having friends that are having friends and activities that get you doing different things, being creative, being out in nature, grounded, rooted, those things go a long way.
Being in DEI work, I'm a self-proclaimed nerd, has gotten me into Dungeons and Dragons podcasting, right? Like, these are the things that we got to do to take care of ourselves. I also think, there's a stat that often floats around that the tenure of DEI professionals, the average is 2 years. And I'm going to guess that a big cause of that is lack of leadership support. And I don't just mean, like Joanna said, top level CEO, executive, whatever that role is, support. If you have been equipped to be an advocate at whatever level you're at in your role, and your boss is not supportive of that, that has a huge impact on your ability to be resilient in that space. And so I think leadership support has a huge impact on our ability to keep the momentum of this work going.
I think that's absolutely right. I love both of your points. I love the comment about not being afraid to fail. And it does come down to leadership. I would also only add that, for those of us who have been involved in plans throughout various points in our career, strategic or operational or otherwise, being intentional about what you're trying to accomplish, statements of purpose, operational metrics towards accomplishing those goals, and an intentionality about sharing that information with the entire organization and using it as your guiding document will help determine whether any plan is successful or not successful. So in that respect, a good DEI plan is like any good strategic plan, and and it requires the same amount of care, which is to say you ought to think of it as a strategic document, a North Star that you can refer back to, that your employees can refer back to.
We have one final question, a closing thought from each panelist. on what can be done, what can we do, what can we leave today and do to help raise awareness of the importance of DEI, not just in our organization, but in our lives.
I think one way to continue to raise positive awareness is to be true to yourself and to really, before you expect other people to perform, to treat you in a certain way, to do something that you want done, you really have to understand who you are and understand your why. And I think that that can sustain you through both positive and negative experiences.
We've talked a lot this morning about the importance of leadership in an organization in order to make a DEI program effective. But leaders will listen to their employees. So if you're a mid-level manager, you're a frontline employee, get engaged, get involved, demand that there are opportunities to do so within your organization. Be firm, but be patient but persistent is the way I like to say it, in setting that expectation that you want your organization to work in this way or function in this way. So it is incredibly important that you have buy-in from leaders in the organization. But as employees, there are opportunities to do your part and individually and collectively push the leaders of your organization towards doing the right thing. And employees should not be afraid to do that.
I think the kind of combo of what I've heard from Joanna and Eric is I think it's important for us to have an elevator pitch of our why, right? So when there's pushback or you're trying to make yourself heard around this, that you're able to say in a sentence what DEI is, why it matters to you, right? And my phrase is that DEI is about making sure employees can thrive in the workplace no matter their identity. That's it, right? And so being able to kind of combine these things and figure out your why and being able to communicate that as you're working to advocate and challenge the status quo, I think is a good point.
Well, thank you. Can we give our panelists a round of applause? This has been a fantastic conversation this morning. With this group of leaders here in Cuyahoga County, we will continue to have a positive impact spotlighting the positive effects of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and continuing to dispel all those myths. A final closing thought is, Joanna mentioned it, that when people feel if somebody else gains something, then I'm losing something. And it builds this scarcity mentality. But we have to make sure we understand that if we believe in diversity, if we practice inclusion and build systems to sustain equity, everybody benefits. A powerful quote I read from Mother Teresa was, "I can do things you cannot. You can do things I cannot. But together we can do great things." So we always close with this. The next time someone asks you, can we talk? What do we always say? Yes, we can. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.